The New York Jets have a new head football coach. His name is Aaron Glenn, a familiar face and name in the organization, a first-round pick by New York way back in 1994, spent 8 seasons in the defensive backfield for Gang Green, and after 4 years as Detroit's defensive coordinator, Aaron Glenn, now the new head coach in New York. DRS, we talked about this yesterday. Aaron Glenn interviewing with the Jets in Florham Park on Tuesday afternoon in person, and the hope was for the Jets they would not allow Aaron Glenn to leave without an offer and a signed deal to become that next head coach. But he did depart back to the Motor City, mulled it over for about 24 hours, and yesterday it became official. Aaron Glenn, now the new head coach of the New York Jets.
Been there, done that, right? Aaron Glenn knows the Big Apple. Drafted there as a first-round draft pick, played good football for the Jets, so he knows the organization per se and the fan base, which is a great start, which helps you to get in that honeymoon stage like, hey, he's one of our own. But let's understand this. You know, you talk about the X's and O's, which we'll find out what type of coach he is, but you wanted really to pick the brains of the Detroit Lions organization and say, this is how we're going to restart our team in that mold, where the city, the town, the fans are going to buy into this. We're going to play hard-nosed football. We're going to be aggressive, and these players are going to give it their all in the field, because that's something we haven't seen from the Jets, particularly this past season. You fired Robert Saleh to get a look at Albrecht as the defensive coordinator, and it seemed like all of the talent on the football team was just soft at that point. Nobody wanted to fight for anything. There was different factions, the Aaron Rodgers faction, the offense, the defense, players holding out, players not giving it their all. We've seen that here. I think that ends on day one, which is fantastic because that's half of the battle. You must start that foundation and building it up. Now, the only issue is this is a veteran team. Can you teach those old dogs new tricks? That's always the question marks that are going to pop up. Is this a complete rebuild saying, I have a vision for this football team, and the vision right now is unclear because the players I have, I'm not really going to use the future because it's not really a young team. It's a veteran-laden team, which starts with the quarterback on the offensive side. How about some of those aging linebackers or Hassan Reddick getting a little bit older, holding out, getting a lot of money, and not performing at all? So I do think the culture is going to change, and that's a good thing. But for me, when I pick head coaches, I always start on the offensive side because that's the key ingredient. You can always find a solid defensive coordinator to coach your defense, i.e. the Philadelphia Eagles getting Vic Fangio, fixing the worst defense in the NFL and turning them into the best defense in the NFL. But the problem is always on the offensive side. I'm going to give the Jets the benefit of the doubt because I don't look at this hire and say this was a bad one. Could this work out? Yes. Do you need a new foundation? Do you need a coach that's going to be able to stand up in front of your players and get the best out of them? I think you will, and we'll see how it plays out.
And there's been a lot of conversation about that. Even Aaron Glenn, as the Lions were getting ready for an NFC division round matchup against the Commanders, was asked about his defensive background and where the NFL is going right now, and the idea of successful head coaches, often coming from the offensive side of the football, being those creative whizzes that have success as a head coach because you can fill out your staff to address the other needs. Aaron Glenn barked back at that and said, listen, I'm a football coach. I happen to work on the defensive side of the ball, but I spend a lot of time studying offensive systems and in those offensive meetings around our organization. Donnie, for a team of the New York Jets, where Aaron Glenn is now the 7th new head coach that was hired since the end of the 2000 NFL season, it seems to be a similar philosophy. 6 of those 7, including Glenn, first-time head coaches with a defensive background, coming from a defensive coordinator role or something as a defensive assistant coach around the National Football League. The lone exception to that is Adam Gase, who was also a disaster for the New York Jets. It's just an interesting thought for the Jets on how they want to approach things moving forward. I think Aaron Glenn, by all reports, by all indications, hearing from those around him on either side of the football in Detroit, they think this guy is a genius. They think this guy will get the most out of his players each and every moment. I hope he has success. But he enters a scenario with the New York Jets, an organization that has not made the NFL postseason in 14 consecutive years. By far the longest drought in the National Football League, but also the longest postseason drought in any of the 4 major men's professional sports leagues in North America, including the NBA, NHL, and MLB. And Donnie, in the 14 years missing out on the playoffs, half of them, including this past season, the Jets won 5 games or fewer. It is a large task for Aaron Glenn to come in and turn things around right away.
It is, but also when you're a coach, these are some of the circumstances that you like. If you're handed a great football team and underwhelmed, well, you're a really bad football coach. You're going to get the benefit of the doubt in New York as long as you proceed 2 different ways that I said. If you're going to stand up in front of that microphone and say, I have a clear-cut plan, and Aaron Rodgers is not back, or Aaron Rodgers is back from day one, I've already told him my exact scenario, here's how we're going to proceed. I say, you know what, I like that. Or is it up to Woody Johnson and his 17, 18-year-old son, Brick Johnson, on whether Aaron Rodgers is coming back? And then we take a look at Aaron Glenn, who's just a head coach in name and doesn't have a lot of say in the organization. But this is what we talked about, Ben, where the fact is he flew in. They're like, we can't let him out there. We're going to offer him the contract, and he left there. He was hearing things that he didn't like, okay, head coach reports directly to the general manager, then the vice president, then to me as the owner. Hold on now. I want those communication lines direct, because if I need a quarterback, if I need a linebacker, I want to make a draft pick, I get the last say here. Also, what's the compensation? And we talked about it yesterday. Right. He got his full 5 years and probably got a hefty pay raise than probably what a first-time head coach is going to get. So I think things worked out in his favor. They wanted him, and he wanted that job, but I think he did the right thing with him and his agent, stretching that out an extra half day to make sure he got exactly what he wanted out of that team.
Absolutely so, DRS. The last time the New York Jets even had a winning record in an NFL regular season was 2015. Did not make the playoffs that year despite double-digit wins. Aaron Glenn, now the 5th head coach around the NFL that played for the organization he now leads. And for the Detroit Lions, they have to fill out their coordinators, with Ben Johnson, of course, departing for Chicago. We'll hear from Ben, the new leader of the Bears, in just a little bit, and Aaron Glenn, the new head coach of the New York Jets. So still 4 head coaching vacancies around the NFL, including in Jacksonville. What are the Jaguars going to do, DRS? They need a new head coach and a new general manager. Trent Baalke is out. We'll break down why next. An absolute stunning move in Jacksonville that perhaps was made 2 weeks too late. Trent Baalke, the GM in Jacksonville for the previous 4 seasons, is now out as the general manager of this Jaguars franchise, fired yesterday. It was Monday, January 6th, the day after the end of the 2024 NFL regular season, that Doug Peterson was let go by Jacksonville. But Trent Baalke was retained by ownership, led, of course, by Shad Khan. And it was rather surprising, DRS, because all around the National Football League, people were like, okay, I can understand firing Doug Peterson, but why in the world would you keep the embattled GM, Trent Baalke, to lead a new coaching search? And then we got reports that Shad Khan said the new head coach that will be hired will report in to me. And over 16 days later, Jacksonville then fires Trent Baalke. DRS, try to make some sense of it if you wouldn't mind.
There's no sense to it. And also, if you remember, I believe it was an interview where those two, talking about the owner and the general manager, sat side by side and was asked the question, like, what happens if, like, the new coach doesn't like the GM? He's like, yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, I probably would get rid of the GM at that point now. It's like, what are we actually doing in Jacksonville? What type of effort? Because at least you want a solid front that you're presenting here to the workforce, which means, like, no, this is my general manager. He's in charge. He's going to make that decision. End of story. So at least you know what you're getting into. But then you hear the owner going like, well, if they don't like him, yeah, sure, we can always get rid of him. It's not a big deal, which then says, why did you keep him anyway? And it's from the initial point when we opened the show. It's simple. You're an NFL owner. You have dozens, let's just say, of people that work under you that are your eyes and ears for the organization and around the NFL. Hey, Mr. Khan, just want to let you know, I have a couple coaches here that I'm back channeling. They're saying it's going to be an issue with this general manager, whether or not they want to take your job. The minute you hear that, that's an issue, because most coaches would say, love that GM. Can't wait to get in the building. Let me sell you on my ideas. We would be a match made in heaven. And the minute that you're hearing the coaches that you know are going to be head coaches this cycle telling you, it's nice that you're open. That might be an option, but we don't like your general manager. We're looking elsewhere right now. There should have been a change made immediately. So now it's great that you got rid of the general manager who around the NFL circles wasn't very liked. but you got rid of him 2.5 weeks too late, where you might have had a chance at Ben Johnson. You might have been able to say, hey, look, come down here. It's a great place to live. Low taxes. You're going to pick your general manager. You'll report directly to me. You have Trevor Lawrence. We'll give you whatever you want to try to succeed, and also in a division that you can win. It's not like saying you're going to go to Vegas and look at the tough trials you're going to have, the Chicago Bears. Yeah. There were some appealing things that you could have had in Jacksonville, but you just burned those bridges for an entire season where now you have to pick up the scraps and hope somebody likes you. And what is that? Setting your organization back another 2 to 3 years because that's the coaches you actually didn't want, but hopefully somebody just took the job. Terrible.
It is insane. And Donnie, to end out our show yesterday, we were discussing Liam Cohen, who seemed to be the front runner in Jacksonville, even by reports yesterday from the inner workings of the Jags organization. Tampa's offensive coordinator becoming the new head coach. But then he removed himself from the running. And of course, the natural thought was, well, nobody wants to work even around Trent Baalke, which then leads to his dismissal just a few hours later. So what does Jacksonville do now? Do they hire a GM and start the coaching search again? We got reports that Robert Saleh, former Jets head coach, is flying into Duval County today for an in-person meeting on Friday. Was that before Trent Baalke was fired or after Trent Baalke was fired? What exactly is going to happen with the Jags? And Donnie, you mentioned it. You have Trevor Lawrence. You have your franchise guy. We can debate whether we think Trevor Lawrence is a top 10, top 5, top 15 quarterback around the NFL. But it should be an attractive destination, and it is not. It is incredibly, incredibly chaotic. Look at the resume that Trent Baalke put together in a 4-year run. That total, 25-43. Urban Meyer was there back in the 2021 season. That should have been grounds for dismissal right away. The Jacksonville Jaguars should be an enticing location of the NFL head coaching vacancies. It is quite the opposite.
Yeah, a division you can win, a franchise quarterback that is signed that does have a lot of talent and was a franchise guy when you drafted him, a wide receiver that you hit a grand slam home run on him out of LSU and Brian Thomas Jr. You got a solid situation in your backfield, good pass rushers on the defensive line. This should be a spot where teams and certainly coaches would love to get there and say, you know what, this team could be a problem over the next couple years. Maybe there's a problem just with the owner at this point, Ben.
It's a problem for Jacksonville. More on the early line next. The Wednesday of Conference Championship weekend around the NFL really should be fixated on who is practicing, but it was quite the opposite yesterday. It was a busy day around the NFL. Aaron Glenn hired as the new head coach of the New York Jets. Trent Baalke fired as the general manager in Jacksonville. And a new GM named in Las Vegas. The Raiders tabbing John Spytek as the new general manager to lead the front office. The previous 2 seasons, the assistant GM in Tampa Bay. He had worked, Spytek, with the Buccaneers since 2016, which means he was a part of the organization, of course, when Tom Brady led the Buccaneers to a Super Bowl championship in the 2020 NFL season. Tom Brady, now a minority owner in Las Vegas, but really, it would seem, is starting to call some shots. One step further in the relationship between John Spytek and Tom Brady, they overlap for a season in Ann Arbor. Tom Brady's final year in Michigan as a senior, Spytek's first. He was a linebacker. Didn't see all that much playing time for the Maize and Blue, but still many commonalities between the general manager now in Las Vegas in Spytek and his buddy and now new boss, Tom Brady.
Yeah, we'll see how it plays out. We'll see the moves they make because they do need some talent, which in turn means a quarterback of the future is probably the most pressing need that the Vegas Raiders need. But I can't fault this because you want guys on the same page. Like if you think Tom Brady, one of the best, maybe the best ever to play football, understands how to put a winning organization together. He was in New England, learned under Bill Belichick, and you saw how that went, multiple Super Bowls. But then also had the ability to say, I'm going to leave that as an aging veteran and go to a completely new organization. and I'm going to lift them to a Super Bowl myself. So he is going to get the benefit of the doubt from me. And I'm not saying this is a bad hire. You just like the common knowledge of this guy understands what I'm looking for. We can work together. The communication lines are open. I know the guy from the past here. And also, coming from a pretty good organization, the Bucs, he didn't pluck this guy from a bad organization with a lot of turmoil. Right. I like what the Bucs have been doing, and Brady won a Super Bowl there, and they're competitive by winning divisions after divisions after divisions. So that is a positive. I just want to see what the game plan is going to be moving forward. Is this guy in charge where he runs things off of Tom Brady, or is Tom Brady in charge saying, what I say goes, and this guy will be my mouthpiece perfectly while I operate behind the scenes? That's still to be determined, but we still have to give Tom Brady the benefit of the doubt at this point that he hired a good general manager that's ready to go in the NFL.
A lot of familiarity there, of course, as well. Seems to be a good move in Las Vegas for Spytek, getting that first shot at really calling all the shots. Worked under Jason Light, who has been a long-time general manager with the Buccaneers, now going on 11 seasons, about to embark on year number 12 in Tampa. That's pretty solid consistency within a front office, and as we shared in various different roles the previous 2 seasons as the assistant GM with the Buccaneers, John Spytek was there since 2016. A stable foundation in Tampa, hoping to create the same, of course, in Las Vegas. The Raiders are a compelling organization at this moment. We talked about what Aaron Glenn will have the arduous task of trying to do in New York to lead the Jets back to a postseason for the first time in 14 years. More than likely will not happen in his debut year as the head coach in 2025. That could be a decade and a half, 15 years consecutively of missing out on the playoffs. Now, the Raiders made the playoffs just a few years ago, but the RS since 2002, the Raiders have made the playoffs twice. Both of those years, they reached the postseason in Las Vegas and or Oakland, were the only 2 seasons the Raiders in the last 22 around the National Football League have had a winning record. And of course, the Raiders, still plenty of questions to address this offseason. First and foremost, who's going to be the head coach now that the GM is in place? And then number 2, we're not even drafting in the top 5 anymore. We have pick number 6. What are we doing at the quarterback position?
Yeah, that's the question, and you're going to have to figure that out. Is this one of those years where you hire a head coach and let you say to yourself, we're going to play this through, and maybe we'll just get one of those reads on the organization, how's it's doing and what we can go for? That could be one thing. But let's also understand one thing about the Vegas Raiders, because you're only as good as your ownership groups put you in that position to win. The reason I say that is, let's remind ourselves, Al Davis was a legend in the AFL and the NFL back in the early 1980s, 1970s, the John Madden era. They were winning Super Bowls, commitment to excellence, just win, baby. We glamorize that. And by the way, fantastic color combinations. But understand the businessman that Al Davis was. He actually fought. Think about this in this day and age. To get out of Los Angeles when he was going to be the only professional football team in L.A. Can you imagine what the Raiders would be worth today if they never decided to go back to Oakland after St. Louis acquired the Rams? Unbelievably horrible business decision. Then he goes back and ruins the ballpark up there in Alameda County Coliseum by putting in Mount Davis and holds the city hostage, then sells his team out to go to Las Vegas, which is horrendous in itself, but also tutoring his son all along who has no business owning a team at this point, and they run horribly. Is it a surprise? Absolutely not. Maybe Tom Brady can finally get something in that organization that says, understand this. I'm here for the long term. I'm still young. I'm going to run this team, and within 5 years, we're going to be a respectable organization, because it all starts at the top. Horrible business decisions made left and right by the Davis family. Maybe we finally got it right with allowing Tom Brady into our owner's circle here, and maybe he can guide us in the right direction. But you're right about the quarterback position. You don't win anything without a quarterback. And having said that, if you don't have your quarterback next year, good luck in that division, because it's going to get ugly quick.
Yep, absolutely so. Slandering Al Davis here on the show today, but Donnie is correct. Bad ownership. Bad ownership is the reason. Fans can blame players. They can blame a coaching staff. They can look specifically at a head coach or a front office. If bad organizations continue to be bad over a long span of time, a couple of blips on the radar of success, and then everything else is failure, you can look in one spot only. That is ownership, which leads us perhaps to our next team to discuss, That would be the Chicago Bears. As Donnie highlighted yesterday, as Ben Johnson walked into Hallis Hall for the first time as the Bears' new head coach, he should have looked around at everybody. Maybe not the poor staffers grinding it out on their 9 to 5, trying to make the Bears the best franchise they can be, but maybe the McCaskey family and say, get out of here, I'm the new sheriff in town. What we heard from Ben Johnson yesterday in his introductory press conference officially, and of course, DRS, the main topic of conversation, quarterback Caleb Williams entering year 2 in the NFL.
Modern football in the NFL is quarterback driven. That is no secret. You can look at analytics. Right now, quarterback success is a higher predictor of winning and losing than turnover ratio, which it's been for 20 plus years. Okay, that's changed. So there's no doubt Caleb played a large component into my decision. He is a phenomenal talent that had, as many quarterbacks do, an up and down rookie year. Where I see my role is as a supporter of him. This offense will be calibrated with him in mind. We're going to build this thing. This is not simply a dropping of a previous playbook down on the table and starting there. Nope. We're ripping this thing down to the studs, and we're going to build it up with him first and foremost, and then with the pieces around him next.
And we'll hear from Caleb Williams after the break, but DRS, a lot of reports yesterday out of Hallis Hall that if you can win an introductory press conference, Ben Johnson did exactly that in Chicago.
Yeah, Corpse could have won that introductory press conference with how bad that organization is. Hey, we got a casket up there with a dead body. Man, what a great hire by the Bears because of what we saw of their previous hires and what they've been doing at this point. So for my money here, I loved what he actually said at that press conference because this shows the guy absolutely gets it. He's not saying like, well, I'm bringing that Detroit mentality. I'm bringing that Detroit playbook, and here we go away. No, you have a completely different quarterback. But he goes, I'm talented enough that I will build a dominant offense that specifies exactly what my quarterback likes to do. I love to hear that home run hire by the Chicago Bears.
And let's hear from Caleb Williams after the break, live right here on the Early Line. Live right here on the Early Line on SportsGrid, the introductory press conference for new Bears head coach Ben Johnson yesterday. We just heard from him before the break on how he plans to incorporate his offensive scheme surrounding his new quarterback, about to embark on year number 2 in his NFL journey. That, of course, Caleb Williams, the first overall pick in 2024. So enough of myself and Donnie. Let's hear from Caleb himself on his reaction to Chicago hiring Ben Johnson.
Extremely excited. When we called, it was Kevin, George, Ryan, and Ted all on the phone, and I kind of said thank you to all of them, and then once I got off the phone, I was driving on the highway, and I don't know if it was safe or not, but I gave out a loud yell and scream of just excitement, of just it brings a bunch of clarity to the off season. It brings a bunch of different things to the off season, and I'm really excited about obviously the Bears and this org and being able to make this happen and keep Ben Johnson as our coach for a long time.
I mean, Caleb Williams should be absolutely thrilled, DRS. The Bears made the correct decision to get Ben Johnson, which surprised some around the NFL, but you heard from Johnson himself. Caleb was a big decision-making factor in him taking on the Bears' head coaching job. It should be a positive and beneficial partnership moving forward. Do you think it will?
Yes, I do, because talent is what succeeds in the NFL, and harnessed talent makes it even better, where you can take a raw kid and say he has every tool I need. And we're not even calling, like, Caleb Williams is the last thing that's raw. This guy is this guy is polished, this guy can do everything you need him to do. Now you get a coach that says, I'm going to take what you do extremely well and make you play even better, and that's just unbelievable. I think it's going to work out fantastic, because if you're telling me I can run an offense with Jared Goff, who is a statue in the pocket, has a decent arm here and some talent, and look at what we did there. Now I can get a kid that can actually manipulate the pocket, roll out, use his legs, and make every throw at the same time. Yeah, we're going to make this work. So absolutely. This is why we talked about it last year, why it was so puzzling when Eberflus came back, because now you have a job that every single offensive mind is going to go, I want that job. I can't believe it's not available, but boy, I hope something goes wrong this year because next year I'll want that job again. Yeah. Exactly the situation there in Detroit with Ben Johnson, eyeing up that position. Even last year, he could have the keys to the fort there for Washington. And you were drafting a quarterback. You had an organizational change. And he probably still in his mind goes, you know what? I'm waiting for the perfect opportunity before I leave. Let me go back to Detroit. The perfect opportunity opened up in Chicago. He took that there. So he's not lying when he goes like, yeah, they threw me a lot of money and it was just time to leave Detroit. No, he wanted this job because of why? This quarterback he wanted to coach.
Absolutely, DRS. And we talked about bad ownership and what it can mean in plaguing an organization. My best friend in the world, Luke Lamble, huge Chicago Bears fan. Grew up in Chicago. Because of him, I have sympathy for the Bears and try to understand what that fan base goes through. And each and every year, Luke tells me if there is a good thing, the Bears will often spoil it. You hope that is not the case with Caleb Williams. You hope that is not the case now with Ben Johnson. You hope this can be the dawn of a new era in the Windy City. We shall see. But you would think, DRS, just with the pieces in place, that this combination of head coach and quarterback, this would be it. Ben Johnson, perhaps the most innovative play caller in the NFL right now, with great success. His 3 years acting as the offensive play caller in the Motor City, the Detroit Lions were a top 5 scoring offense each and every year. The Chicago Bears have now ranked in the top 5 in the NFL in scoring offense and points per game in over a decade since 2013. That is step number 1. In Caleb Williams, who was the first overall pick, of course, the generational touted talent entering the NFL in 2024, had what I would say was actually a pretty good year if you actually watched him play football. But at times, it was easy to pile on a disastrous rookie season for the Bears as an organization. You see those passing yards? 3,541? That is the 5th most in a single season in Bears franchise history. A franchise that, despite being one of the most historic around the NFL, has never had a 4,000-yard passer. Caleb Williams should be on track to see improvement in his game and, of course, the overall success for this Chicago organization in the year and hopefully years to come.
Yes, absolutely. And we're hoping to hit the ground running. You saw Ben Johnson talk about this. And I love when coaches set them up where they don't say, like, you know what? This is a long rebuild. I'm going to set my foundation here. He basically is telling you he's ripping it down to the studs, but you better expect that we are going to win right away. That's putting it into the mindset of the offseason that this isn't a honeymoon phase. Let's see how it goes and really sink our teeth into in year number 2. He's telling them, get ready. Offseason here. We're installing an offense. We expect it to be flawless by week number 1. And if it's not, we're going to work towards that for the remaining parts of the 17 to 18-week season that we're going to embark on. So the future is very bright. You got the quarterback. You got the head coach. Now we need to see some of those results, and I think we will.
Donnie, we kind of talked about this yesterday. One of the reasons people looked at Caleb Williams and said, whoa, what's happening this year in Chicago is because this wasn't a first overall pick entering a bad organization with a win total of 5.5. If they could get to 6 wins and show some signs of life, that would be considered a successful year. No, the Bears entered this year with an 8.5 win total. The over had the juice, expected to be the playoff contender that we have seen out of Jaden Daniels with the Commanders. And when you have 1 and 2, number 1 overall pick, number 2 overall selection, in direct comparison to one another, that also doesn't paint a super fond light on Caleb Williams. So I ask you this question. Entering 2025, with Ben Johnson in place, entering year number 2 for Caleb Williams, what do you think the Bears' win total is going to be?
What it's going to be set at, or what we think they're actually going to wind up with?
What it's going to be set at, odds-wise.
I would probably say almost identical to what you saw last year, to be honest, because that is a tough division that we didn't expect it to be maybe even that tough entering into the season because Minnesota was the wild card. Minnesota, regardless of quarterback, is going to be pretty good. But once again, the expectations of Chicago are higher, even what they were last year. I expect it to be identical to what we saw last year. I think that would be a fair price.
And what is so fascinating is now you have a second-year QB, a first-year head coach, expected to have a winning record. More on the early line next. We welcome you back to the early line on this Thursday. So much news yesterday around the NFL. We haven't even really previewed Conference Championship Sunday. We'll keep an eye on those practice and injury reports to start off our second of 3 hours. But to end out the opening hour, DRS introductory press conference with Ben Johnson, new head coach of the Bears yesterday, intro presser for new GM in Nashville. The Titans, of course, hiring Mike Vrabel, who spent the last decade and a half in Kansas City in some form or fashion as the new GM. And the Titans, after a 3-win season and the worst cover team the NFL has ever seen, 2-15 against the number, will be selecting first overall. They desperately need a quarterback, but you saw there in that quote what exactly Vrabel had to say about utilizing that first overall pick. Let's show you that quote once again. Quote, "We won't pass on a generational talent with the first pick in the NFL draft." End quote. The RS draft season is smokescreen season. A lot of statements are said to provide just a little bit of a speckle of information, but then allowing people like us to overanalyze what exactly those combinations of words mean. What do you think new Titans GM Mike Vrabel meant by that?
Let's first start with what was he going to say? Like, look, I took the job because you have the number 1 pick, and we are going to pass over generational talent. We're going fullback here with number 1 overall. So understand that. But also, the line's moving because he said that. Generational talent means, yes, I just picked my quarterback of the future, which we couldn't pass over because he is a generational talent. Or we picked another quarterback who we think is a generational talent. Or we picked a wide receiver quarterback combination who could be a generational talent. This is what general managers are supposed to do. And also, if you really have your mindset behind the scenes, here's how I took the job. You know what? We need a lot of talent still here. We feel that maybe there's not a quarterback that we like, or we can trade back to 3 and get said quarterback that we like and pick up a first rounder for the future here. This is all a smokescreen. You have to say things like, you know what, behind the scenes, we want to trade this pick. But you must come out and say, we're not trading this pick. Absolutely not. We have our guy that we like. We'll let you know, which means other teams are like, oh, no, he's going to draft our guy. Let's up the ante to get that pick. Never show your cards here. Of course, he's going to say it's a generational talent, and idiots are going to buy like generational talent. That means cornerback, wide receiver. No, it doesn't. It means absolutely nothing. So the market's changing and looking to bet a non-quarterback now because of what the general manager is saying at an opening press conference when you haven't had any workouts, any vetting process, or anything is hilarious. But that's what we do. We speculate and we run with information. What the general manager said here means nothing to who he's actually going to draft or should I say, not draft, come up in the upcoming draft.
Entering week 17 of the 2024 NFL regular season before the Giants won outright as a touchdown underdog at home against the Indianapolis Colts when it seemed as though they would have pole position for that first overall pick. Shedeur Sanders was an odds-on favorite to be that first overall selection. Then, after the end of the regular season, Titans secure that number 1 pick, Cam Ward, the quarterback out of Miami, minus money odds-on favorite. Now, Ward still remains the favorite, but at plus 105, and Travis Hunter, the Heisman Trophy winner who can do it all, only backed by 50 cents at plus 155, and Shedeur Sanders, now a much longer price at plus 360. Always fun, DRS. Vrabel did say, by the way, yesterday that he is going to turn over every stone to make sure they address the quarterback position. And let me tell you something, Mike. If you turn to Will Levis with the number 1 overall pick in your pocket, oh boy, it's going to be a disappointing start to your tenure with the Titans. Donnie, yesterday, for the second consecutive day, Brian Schottenheimer interviewing in person at the Star for Dallas's head coaching vacancy. They spent nearly 4 hours together earlier this week. Yesterday, another in-person interview for a guy that's been in the organization with the Cowboys for the last 3 years. What more do you need out of Brian Schottenheimer that you don't know already?
You don't know anything about that because who knows if he's going to get that head coaching job. Maybe Jerry's just bored. Like, man, we had a great lunch yesterday. You want to come back over for lunch here? Let's just call it an interview, and we'll spin it off. It'll be a great tax write-off for me as I can have it as a business lunch as opposed to my own lunch at this point. Who knows what the Cowboys are thinking, but boy, oh boy, if they do hire Brian Schottenheimer, just the laughs, the fantasticness, the amazingness of the coaching hires you could have had, and you wound up with Brian Schottenheimer, boy, that's going to be awesome to watch that fan base explode over that.
A very familiar name in Dallas. It's kind of how Jerry Jones likes to do things. Hour 2 next. Oh, we're having a lot of fun here on a Thursday on the early line. Can you just say that again for all the people? We're talking about Conference Championship Sunday. We'll talk about NFL head coaching hires in just a second. But on the desk of Pro Football Today, we've got two Birds backers in Kevin Walsh and Donnie Rightside from regional Philadelphia. And then you've got Joe Lisi, who has always been a believer in the Heisman winner at LSU, Jaden Daniels. What are some of the stakes for Sunday in Philadelphia?
Yeah, well, number one, we've already threatened Joe Lisi that he might not appear on Pro Football Today on Sunday. That we already laid that down where we can't be too optimistic on the opposite side with the stakes this high. Right. But also, sometimes we like to have story time here on the desk. One of the best stories I ever heard is, like, Joe Lisi is his name. So, he talked to, hey, Joe Lisi, named after whoever. But he had a funny story that said one time he was going to get a job and handed in his job application. The receptionist called him up and said, that's a great name, Joe Lisi. I think I'm going to name my daughter or my son Joe Lisi. And he goes, no. It's 2 words. It's Joe Lisi. Oh, but I like the name Joe Lisi. So there you go. Little background on Joe Lisi of how his name appears. And then we're going to rise the stakes this Sunday. Should the Eagles beat the Commanders, Joe Lisi's name on the network is just Joe Lisi from here on out. How about that? You like that? I think that could work. Like, I have a handle, like Donnie Rightside. How about just one word, Joe Lisi? That's it. Perfect.
Hold on a second. Did he not space out the name enough?
He must not.
He wrote on the application?
Because the receptionist loved the name. It goes, ooh, Joe Lisi. And he's like, no, my name's Joe Lisi. I'm like, still doesn't matter. I like the name Joe Lisi. There you go. Some kid out there right now is named Joe Lisi as the first name. That's it. That's probably factual.
Oh, I never heard this story before in my life.
Great story.
Oh,
Ask it. We'll tell it.
Actual tears. Actual tears coming out of my...
Yeah.
Oh, my God.
See that? Hit you that right before we come into the break. There's
I might
the
need a second. You might need to intro the poll, brother. Oh, God.
All right, here's the poll here at SportsGrid Network. We'd like to ask the public out here who they want to fade. And that question is, so far, which NFL head coach hire has been the best? Run the stinger if you want to. Go ahead. Run the stinger. There, stinger. Did you like that?
It's time for Fade the Public.
Wow. Wow.
What is happening?
Look at that.
What
I was actually
happening
thinking,
right
like, we
now?
usually hear it. I was like, do we actually hear that? But no, we used to hear it, but now we have the true words of a genius behind there. Is he getting royalties for that, by the way?
What is that?
It's got to be Joe Lisi. Play it again. Let's hear it.
It's time for Fade the Public.
Now,
Hold on a second.
how many takes? How many takes was that? It couldn't have been one take. Oh, wow. I'm surprised. Yeah.
From Joe Lisi. Joe Lisi. How are we saying it? Joe Lisi? It's like the inflection there.
Correct. Yes.
Joe Lisi.
Joe Lisi.
Yeah, I like it. Okay.
There you go.
I just got to ask, and Friezo, you can, speak to us behind the scenes. That was planned before we started telling the Joe Lisi story he was going to do. I mean, you talk about serendipitous. That is beautiful, beautiful stuff. So, as we go to SportsGrid on Twitter, so far, which NFL head coaching hire has been the best? 7 vacancies at some stage of this offseason. 3 have now been filled after Aaron Glenn, hired yesterday by the New York Jets. Mike Vrabel for the Patriots, Ben Johnson for the Bears, or Aaron Glenn in New York. Donnie, I don't even think it's who's winning this poll, which is Mike Vrabel. Interesting in itself that Vrabel has edged out Ben Johnson with the Bears. Man, the public either does not think all that optimistically about Aaron Glenn. I don't even think it's that on the former Detroit DC. I just think it's the Jets and how they structure their franchise each and every time. 8.4% of the vote. That is it. Thinking Aaron Glenn might be the best head coaching hire so far.
Yeah, we should add, Aaron Glenn on this one this year. It's like, whoa, I don't really think I'm a great hire at this point, which I do think is quality. But is this just like the Detroit fan base showing up here and just voting against everything that has Detroit? Like,
Maybe.
they probably hate Ben Johnson going to the Bears. We got to vote Vrabel. No, we can't give it to Aaron Glenn. He left. We got to go Vrabel. So I'm thinking that 50.5 is 1% Patriots fans and 49% Detroit Lions fans just angry right now that Ben Johnson and Aaron Glenn have absolutely left the building. But to be honest, if it isn't that, and I'm being facetious, I'm really surprised that Ben Johnson isn't leading this poll. Mike Vrabel is. I like the Vrabel hire, certainly to the Patriots. I think it makes a lot of sense. But I just think that you say, like, who is the prized possession going to a place where he can really institute what he likes to do, which is run an offense? I'm surprised Ben Johnson is in second place with about 41% of that vote.
Me as well, DRS, because Mike Vrabel is consistent. Mike Vrabel was incredibly successful in his 6 years in Nashville. Mike Vrabel had a winning record over the span of those 6 seasons. So it makes sense to go with the guy that is proven as a head coach in an organization, of course, that he knows very well. A lot of people thought, and I think were surprised, that Vrabel was canned last year by the Titans and think of him as a highly successful head coach. So it makes sense, but it's not exactly the snazziest or most innovative or creative hire to bring Vrabel to New England. Of course, it was the first one done. It probably was done behind the scenes entering week 16 of this NFL season. I think Ben Johnson was the name as the hottest candidate in this head coaching cycle that everybody thought wherever he ended up, that would probably be the, hey, that's the best hire. That's an A+. That's an A at bare minimum. I wonder if that has to do so much with Ben Johnson or more so Caleb Williams and some questions in Chicago. Again, I think we have tried to do our best to dispel the idea that Williams was the issue for Chicago this past season. It got my vote as well, Ben Johnson with the Bears, because not only do I believe in Ben Johnson, about to become a successful first-year head coach, albeit with the inexperience at this level right now, but I believe in what his offensive scheme is going to mean for a talented Bears team right away.
Yeah, I think the upside, too, like if you change it, which NFL coach has the highest upside with his team? It's got to be Ben Johnson, because you're looking at an offense that was really bad last year, and the upside is they're going to be a better offense, and they will. But if you are looking for, let's just say this poll was changed to safest option to pick as a head coach, it might be Mike Vrabel going back to New England. The last thing I can think of is like 2 to 3 years, you're firing Vrabel because he couldn't get more than 6 wins. And that is a terribly bad, poor front office, which gave him not a lot of talent to work with outside of what you think is going to be a franchise quarterback. You're thinking he can bring that hard-nosed mentality, the same thing Aaron Glenn is supposed to bring from Detroit over to the Jets to sort of turn it around. So different ways you can read that poll, but we didn't ask all that stuff. We just asked which is the best overall coaching hire, which I am slightly surprised that it turned out to be Mike Vrabel.
Patriots have the 4th overall pick. The Pats have more than $130 million in cap space this offseason to bolster that roster around Drake May for Mike Vrabel to have success. Of course, he has hired Josh McDaniels to bring him back as the OC in Foxborough, and Terrell Williams, Detroit defensive line coach, who is now gone. Donnie, to your point, did Lions fans flood this poll and vote for Vrabel in front of their 2 former guys? Maybe. They have not taken exactly kindly, at least to Ben Johnson going to divisional foe in Chicago. And I shared this with our TEL group chat yesterday, that the Detroit Lions have not had a coordinator hired as a head coach of another team since John F. Kennedy was president. That's a long, long time. That means they've had coordinators leave and maybe be fired or go somewhere else, but not a promotion at a different organization. It is a first for the Lions. This naturally follows success. Both Aaron Glenn and Ben Johnson now head coaches. We'll talk about Conference Championship weekend next.